Sir, step away from the car. Whose vehicle is this?
It's mine. I'm just trying to go home.
People like you don't usually drive something like this. Let me see your ID.
I'm not gonna ask you again. Hands on the table where I can see them, now. The demand, laced with aggression, sliced through the quiet hum of the Barnes & Noble Cafe on Manhattan's Upper West Side. The voice belonged to NYPD officer Kyle Peterson, badge number 7188, a man just 6 months out of the academy. His target, sitting calmly with a tablet, was the Honorable James Baldwin, a federal judge for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. The confrontation that followed, lasting less than 10 minutes, would become a textbook example of police misconduct, forever enshrined in legal and academic discourse. Every second was captured by the store's overhead CCTV 04 camera and, more damningly, by the officer's own body-worn camera, which recorded his escalating hostility in high-definition video and audio. The incident's aftermath was swift and severe, resulting in Officer Peterson's immediate termination, a federal criminal conviction for the violation of civil rights under color of law, and a landmark civil judgment against both him and the city, totaling an astonishing $41,775,000. This is the documented, frame-by-frame record of how a rookie officer's prejudice, acted upon in a moment of profound arrogance, triggered a sequence of events that would utterly and financially obliterate his life. But hours before the shouted commands and the arrival of horrified supervisors, the scene was one of tranquil normalcy. The air in the bookstore was a familiar blend of brewing coffee and printed paper, a comforting scent for the patrons scattered throughout the cafe. For Judge James Baldwin, this was a weekly ritual, a deliberate escape from the formal grandeur of the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse. Here, amidst the quiet focus of students and readers, he could deconstruct complex legal arguments with greater clarity. Dressed in a simple polo shirt and chinos, he projected the image of an academic, not a powerful federal jurist whose decisions shaped law across 3 states. This anonymity was essential to his process. On the screen of his tablet lay the intricate details of Eterna Innovations v. Cygnus Corp., a multi-billion-dollar patent appeal. His mind, a precision instrument honed by decades of legal practice, moved methodically through dense technical briefs and precedents, his stylus making silent, decisive annotations. He had risen from a tireless public defender to his current appointment through an unyielding commitment to intellectual rigor and a profound respect for the law. He was a man who embodied the very essence of justice, completely unaware that he was about to become the target of its most flagrant perversion. Outside on the bustling sidewalk, a starkly different mindset was on patrol. Officer Kyle Peterson walked his beat alongside his field training officer, Marcus Miller, a 15-year veteran. Miller understood the neighborhood's rhythm, but Peterson saw it as a territory rife with hidden threats, a place to assert his newfound authority. The subsequent internal affairs investigation, cataloged as Document 088/NYPD-IAB, would feature Officer Miller's testimony describing Peterson's demeanor as chronically insecure and itching for a confrontation. Peterson viewed the world in rigid, simplistic terms, a worldview that equated non-compliance with criminality and interpreted unfamiliarity as suspicion. As they passed the bookstore, his gaze swept over the patrons and locked onto Judge Baldwin. Later, when pressed for his reasoning, Peterson's only justification was that the judge looked out of place, a statement that investigators would identify as a clear admission of racial profiling. Officer Miller saw only a man working, a common sight in any New York cafe. "Let it go, kid," Miller advised quietly, recognizing the absence of any legal basis for a stop. "There's nothing there. He's a paying customer." But for Peterson, the image of a black man, impeccably dressed and focused on an expensive piece of technology, was not a scene of normalcy. It was a challenge to his authority. He ignored his partner's seasoned advice, interpreting Miller's caution as the very complacency he had sworn to oppose. The surge of self-righteous adrenaline was intoxicating. He believed he was about to perform an act of proactive policing. He adjusted his duty belt, the sound of creaking leather a small, ominous prelude to the chaos he was about to unleash. His hand moved to rest on the grip of his service weapon, a wholly unnecessary gesture of intimidation. Ignoring Miller's weary, resigned sigh, Officer Kyle Peterson pushed open the heavy glass door of the bookstore, taking the first, irrevocable step into a disaster that would be his own making, a mistake that would be quantified down to the last dollar and cost him everything he had and ever would have. The heavy glass door swung shut behind Officer Kyle Peterson, muffling the vibrant sounds of the Manhattan street and replacing them with the serene quiet of the bookstore. The change in atmosphere did nothing to calm the storm of self-righteous adrenaline brewing inside him. His partner, Officer Miller, followed a few paces behind, his expression a mask of professional neutrality that barely concealed his deep reservations. The store's overhead security camera, designated CCTV-04, recorded their entry with silent, impartial clarity, its wide-angle lens capturing Peterson's rigid posture and the way his hand hovered instinctively near his duty belt. He scanned the cafe, his eyes skipping over students and elderly readers before locking back onto his target, Judge James Baldwin. To Peterson, the judge's calm focus was not a sign of intellectual labor, but a mask for illicit activity. He saw not a man of letters, but a suspect. Miller's earlier advice to let it go echoed uselessly in his mind, dismissed as the weakness of a veteran grown complacent. Peterson approached the table, his shadow falling across the judge's tablet. He deliberately positioned himself to block the light, a petty power play meant to assert dominance from the outset. "Good afternoon, sir," he began, his voice a flat, authoritative monotone that carried an undercurrent of accusation. "I need to see some identification." Judge Baldwin did not look up. He continued to trace a line of text on his screen with his stylus, a small, deliberate gesture of non-reaction that seemed to amplify the tension in the air. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the soft hum of the cafe's espresso machine. Then, without lifting his gaze, the judge responded, his voice as calm and measured as a courtroom pronouncement. "Good afternoon, officer. On what grounds are you making this request? What is your reasonable, articulable suspicion for this stop?" The question, a textbook assertion of Fourth Amendment rights, struck Peterson like a physical blow. The audio captured by his own body-worn camera, later analyzed by forensic experts, registered a sharp intake of breath and a subtle increase in his heart rate. To him, this was not a citizen exercising a right. It was a criminal talking like a lawyer, a direct challenge to his authority. His face hardened. "We've had reports of a stolen device matching the description of the one you're using," he lied, the fabrication coming to him with startling ease. The Internal Affairs report would later cross-reference this statement with precinct dispatch logs, document 091/NYPD log, confirming that no such report had ever been filed. It was a pure invention, a pretext born of prejudice. At this, Judge Baldwin finally looked up. His eyes, clear and analytical, met Peterson's. There was no fear in his gaze, no anger, only a profound and unnerving stillness. He was not looking at a police officer. He was evaluating a legal problem, a flawed argument presented before his bench. "I can assure you, officer, this tablet is my property. I am a regular patron here, and I am simply doing my work." He gestured slightly with his stylus to the complex legal documents on the screen. "My receipt for my coffee is on the table. There is no cause for this interaction." Peterson barely heard the words. He was deaf to the logic, blinded by the image he had already constructed in his mind. The judge's eloquence, his unshakable composure, was not evidence of innocence, but proof of a practiced criminality. He saw a con man, a smooth talker trying to outsmart him. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Peterson sneered, his voice rising in volume, drawing the first curious glances from nearby tables. A little too clever for your own good. I said, let me see your identification, now. His demand was no longer a request. It was a raw command, stripped of any pretense of protocol. The documentary footage from CCTV-04 shows the subtle shift in the room's dynamics. A young woman lowered her laptop screen. The barista froze, her hand hovering over a lever. In the background, Officer Miller took a half-step forward, his hand raised slightly as if to intervene before letting it fall back to his side in a gesture of weary defeat. He recognized this critical juncture, the point where a bad stop was about to become a career-ending incident. Judge Baldwin remained seated, his posture unchanged. He made one final attempt to penetrate the wall of irrationality before him, his tone still remarkably level, as if explaining a point of law to a particularly slow student. Officer, you are operating without a legal basis. You have no probable cause, nor even a reasonable suspicion. Your current course of action is an unlawful detention. I am advising you, for your own professional and financial future, to terminate this encounter immediately and walk away. This calm, factual warning was the final trigger. To Peterson, it was an explicit threat, a confirmation of his suspicion that this man was a dangerous element who needed to be subdued. The Internal Affairs Psychological Review, Document 104/NYPD Psych, would later conclude that Peterson suffered from a profound inferiority complex, one that caused him to perceive any intellectual challenge from a minority individual as an existential threat to his authority. "That's it," he snarled, his professionalism completely dissolving into raw anger. "You're obstructing an investigation. Stand up. Place your hands on the table." The judge did not move. He simply watched as the officer, his face now flushed with rage, took the final, irrevocable step. Peterson reached out, his hand closing around Judge Baldwin's arm to forcibly pull him from his chair. This act of physical battery, a clear and flagrant violation of both department policy and federal law, was the point of no return.
The officer's body cam captured the exact moment his fingers made contact, a single damning frame of video that would seal his fate and trigger a financial judgment so catastrophic it would follow him for the rest of his life. What would you do if you were in the judge's position, facing an officer who refuses to listen to reason? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The moment Officer Peterson's fingers closed around Judge Baldwin's arm, the confrontation crossed a legal and physical boundary from which there was no return. The audio feed on Peterson's body-worn camera registered the fabric of the judge's polo shirt straining against the aggressive grip, a sound that would later be isolated and amplified for a jury. The patrons in the cafe, previously just curious onlookers, now stared in open-mouthed shock. This was no longer a tense conversation, it was a public assault. Officer Miller, seeing the situation spiral into a catastrophic failure of police procedure, moved forward again, his voice a low, urgent plea. "Kyle, stop, that's enough." But Peterson, consumed by a toxic mix of adrenaline and wounded pride, violently shrugged off his partner's restraining hand. The rejection was a clear signal. He was beyond reason, operating solely on the flawed premise that his uniform granted him absolute power. "You think you can talk to a cop like that?" he shouted, his voice echoing in the now silent bookstore. "Get up, you're coming with me to the precinct." He yanked on the judge's arm, intending to haul him from the chair. But the response was not one of fear or compliance. It was a calculated and devastating counteroffensive delivered with the chilling precision of a judicial sentence. Judge Baldwin did not resist physically. Instead, he allowed the tension to peak, and then, with unshakable composure, he finally looked directly at the officer. His gaze, captured in a cinematic close-up by the CCTV-04 camera, was piercing, analytical, and utterly devoid of emotion. In a voice that was neither loud nor soft, but carried a resonant clarity that silenced the entire room, he spoke.
Officer Kyle Peterson, I am Federal Judge James Baldwin of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. You have just committed, in sequence, a violation of federal law under Title 18, Section 242 by depriving me of my rights under color of law, unlawful restraint, and assault. All of this is being recorded by your body cam and this establishment's security system. I suggest, for your own sake, that you release me immediately. The foundation of Peterson's authority, built on a fragile ego and a badge, instantly crumbled into dust. The real power in the room had just been revealed, and it was not the man with the gun. The officer's face, captured in high definition, was a mask of disbelief and rage. In that critical moment, faced with irrefutable truth, he would make a choice that would seal his fate forever. The words hung in the air, dense and absolute, fundamentally altering the physics of the room. For a moment, Officer Peterson's brain simply refused to process the information. The audio log from his body cam records a full 2 seconds of dead air, a digital silence mirroring the cognitive void that had opened in his mind. The patrons, who had been watching with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity, were now statues, their phones forgotten, their coffee cooling. They understood on a primal level that the balance of power had just shifted in a way that was both profound and irreversible. But Peterson's reality, built on a foundation of prejudice and a 6-month-old badge, could not accommodate this new data. His mind scrambled for a more plausible explanation, and the one it found was steeped in the very bias that had started the encounter. This wasn't a judge, this was a con artist, a smooth talker using legal jargon to intimidate him. It was a bluff, and he was not going to fall for it. A harsh, barking laugh erupted from his throat, a sound utterly out of place in the bookstore's quiet reverence. "A judge?" he sneered, the scorn dripping from his words. "You? Tell me another one, wise guy." He pointed a trembling finger at Judge Baldwin's face. "Now you're not just getting arrested for disorderly conduct, you're getting arrested for impersonating a judicial officer. That's a felony. You just made this so much worse for yourself." He was doubling down, pushing all his chips onto a losing hand, convinced his aggression was a show of strength. Judge Baldwin did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply held the officer's enraged gaze, his expression one of clinical pity, as if observing a specimen's predictable self-destructive behavior. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, captured in perfect clarity by CCTV 04, he reached inside his chinos. For a split second, a flicker of panic crossed Peterson's face, the thought of a weapon. But the judge's movement was too calm, too measured. He produced a simple, well-worn leather wallet. He didn't flip it open with a dramatic flourish. He opened it as if to pay for a coffee. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was his official identification. He held it out for Peterson to see. The narrative camera zooms in, focusing on the details the officer's eyes were now scanning. The embossed gold seal of the United States Judiciary, a crisp professional photograph of the man sitting before him, and the text, printed in stark official font, "The Honorable James
Baldwin, Circuit Judge, United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit." It was irrefutable. It was the truth. And Kyle Peterson rejected it completely. "That's a good fake," he spat, his voice strained. "A really good fake. You must have paid a lot for it." He pulled out his handcuffs, the metallic click echoing like a gavel in the silent room. "That's it. Game over." He reached forward to clamp the cold steel around the judge's wrist, a final physical act of defiance against a reality he refused to accept. It was a move that would permanently seal his fate, a mistake so profound that its consequences were already materializing, announced by the sudden, heavy swing of the bookstore's glass door.
If you think the officer is about to get exactly what he deserves, hit the like button and subscribe to see the career-ending consequences unfold. The metallic click of the handcuffs was answered by the heavy thud of the bookstore's glass door swinging open. Two figures in darker blue uniforms, adorned with the chevrons of a sergeant and the bars of a lieutenant, stepped inside, their presence immediately commanding the room's attention. The lieutenant, a man in his late 50s with graying temples and a face etched with the weary lines of a long career, took 2 steps and stopped dead. His eyes, trained by 2 decades on the force to assess a volatile scene in a single sweep, moved from Peterson's aggressive posture to the gleaming handcuffs in his hand to the utterly placid man in the chair. Every ounce of procedural momentum ceased. A flicker of disbelief, followed by a wave of dawning horrified recognition, washed over his features. The audio log from his own radio microphone, which was automatically activated upon exiting his vehicle, recorded the sharp intake of his breath. "Judge Baldwin?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly sound of utter shock that nonetheless cut through the tense silence. "What in the hell is going on here?" The question was not directed at the judge. It was an indictment of the scene itself. For Kyle Peterson, those words struck with the force of a physical impact. The world, which moments before had been a simple binary of cop and suspect, fractured into a million complex, terrifying pieces. The lieutenant's immediate deferential recognition of the man he was about to arrest was the external validation that vaporized his entire reality. The security footage from CCTV 04, later used as Exhibit A in the civil trial, shows the color draining from Peterson's face, his mouth falling slightly agape. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. His partner, Officer Miller, simply closed his eyes for a brief moment and let out a slow, resigned breath. A silent confirmation of a disaster he had seen coming from a block away. The patrons, no longer just shocked bystanders, were now active documentarians, their phones raised, recording the public disintegration of an officer's career. The lieutenant's gaze, filled with a cold, controlled fury, finally shifted from the esteemed federal judge and landed squarely on his subordinate. He did not need to raise his voice. His eyes conveyed the full, catastrophic weight of the situation. "Officer Peterson," he began, his tone flat and devoid of any emotion save for a deep professional disappointment. "You have just made the single greatest mistake of your life." Lieutenant Thorne took a deliberate step forward, positioning his body between his disgraced officer and the judge, creating a physical barrier that was also a clear demarcation of power. His movements were economical, precise, and broadcast a message to the entire room. The situation was now under his control. The body cam footage of the accompanying sergeant, a man named Davis, captures what happened next from a third, devastatingly objective angle. "Officer Peterson," Thorne commanded, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than a shout. "Release the judge. Place your handcuffs on the table. Do it now." Peterson's hands, which moments ago had been instruments of his perceived authority, now trembled uncontrollably. The handcuffs, feeling impossibly heavy, slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the wooden table, the sound echoing like a death knell for his career. He took a clumsy step back, his eyes wide with the dawning comprehension of his ruin. Thorne didn't spare him another glance. He turned to the judge, his posture shifting to one of profound respect. "Judge Baldwin, on behalf of the New York City Police Department, I am profoundly sorry for this. We will handle this immediately." He then turned his head slightly, his gaze finding Sergeant Davis. "Sergeant, secure Officer Peterson's service weapon and his body-worn camera. He is being relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending a full internal investigation." The official incident report, filed by Lieutenant Thorne under case number 9547F, details the precise protocol for an on-site relief of duty in cases of gross misconduct. It is a procedure reserved for the most catastrophic failures of judgment. The public humiliation was absolute. As Sergeant Davis professionally and dispassionately unholstered Peterson's weapon and unclipped the camera from his vest, the rookie officer stood there, stripped of his power, his authority, and his identity in less than 60 seconds. He was no longer a cop. He was evidence.
Thorne directed Miller to begin taking witness statements, a task the veteran officer undertook with a grim, stone-faced efficiency. Then, the lieutenant gestured to the door. "Escort him out," Thorne instructed the sergeant. The walk from the cafe to the front entrance was the longest of Kyle Peterson's life, a gauntlet of silent, judging eyes and the unforgiving lenses of a dozen smartphone cameras. As the glass door swung shut behind him, he had no idea that this public shaming was merely the gentle prelude to a financial and legal annihilation so complete it would be studied for decades. The ruin of former officer Kyle Peterson was not a single event, but a meticulous, multi-stage demolition of a life, executed with the cold, procedural precision of the very legal system he had so arrogantly violated. After he was escorted from the Barnes & Noble, a pariah in his own uniform, the consequences began to cascade with breathtaking speed. The first stage was administrative. His suspension, effective the moment Lieutenant Thorne relieved him of his weapon, was a mere formality. The internal affairs investigation, cataloged under case number 9547F, was concluded in a record 72 hours. The evidence was absolute and unassailable. The crystal-clear CCTV 04 footage showing his unprovoked aggression and the damning high-definition video and audio from his own body-worn camera, which captured not only his lies about a stolen tablet, but his contemptuous dismissal of a federal judge's identity. Officer Miller's testimony, a grim and factual account of Peterson's insubordination and racially motivated assumptions, sealed the administrative verdict. Kyle Peterson was terminated for gross misconduct, a dishonorable discharge that permanently blacklisted him from ever serving in any law enforcement capacity in the United States. His $75,000 annual salary, his health benefits, and his nascent pension vanished instantly. He was no longer an officer. He was a liability. The second stage was criminal. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, acting on a direct referral from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, convened a grand jury. The indictment was swift, charging Peterson with a felony violation of Title 18, Section 242 of the U.S. Code, the deprivation of rights under color of law. The trial was a procedural walkthrough. The prosecution simply played the video evidence. The jury deliberated for less than 20 minutes before returning a guilty verdict. The judge in that case, a colleague of Judge Baldwin's who knew the weight of the law, sentenced him to 2 years and 4 months in federal prison, though this was later reduced to supervised probation, 500 hours of community service cleaning public facilities, and a personal fine of $25,000. He was now a convicted felon, a status that stripped him of his right to vote and own a firearm, the very tool that had once been the symbol of his authority. The final stage was the financial apocalypse. Judge Baldwin, a man who understood that justice must be both seen and felt, filed a civil lawsuit against the city of New York and Kyle Peterson personally. The city's attorneys, faced with the catastrophic video evidence and the high-profile nature of the plaintiff, knew a trial would be an unmitigated disaster. They quickly settled. The figure was astronomical, $40 million. In a move of profound judicial grace, Judge Baldwin stipulated that the entire sum be paid directly into a fund managed by the New York Civil Liberties Union, specifically earmarked for defending victims of police brutality and funding de-escalation training programs. The city's payment for Peterson's prejudice would now be used to prevent future Kyle Petersons. But the judge's lawsuit was not finished.
The court allowed the case against Peterson himself to proceed. The judgment was as symbolic as it was financially crushing: $1,500,000. This was not a debt that could be discharged through bankruptcy. It was a permanent lien against his existence. Compounded by the $250,000 he owed his own defense attorneys, his total personal debt was $1,775,000. Today, Kyle Peterson works the night shift at a regional distribution warehouse in New Jersey, stocking shelves for minimum wage. 30% of his pre-tax income is garnished automatically, a constant bi-weekly reminder of the 10 minutes that obliterated his future. He will never own a home. He will never be free of debt. His name is a prominent footnote in law textbooks, a case study in failure. Meanwhile, Judge James Baldwin continues to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. He still frequents that same Barnes & Noble, his weekly ritual unchanged, a quiet testament to the fact that true authority is not worn on a uniform, but earned through character and unwavering respect for the law. The scales of justice in this documented case were balanced with mathematical certainty. But did Kyle Peterson ever truly understand the lesson? Did he ever grasp that his prejudice had a price quantifiable down to the last dollar?
The court records provide the answer: a total cost of $41,775,000. A debt to society and to one man that he will spend the remainder of his life paying. Have you ever witnessed a situation of injustice that you wish had been recorded? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video to spread the message that accountability is non-negotiable.